People say, pick a side, like bisexuality is a decision someone forgot to finish making. Like attraction is supposed to eventually settle down. Choose one direction. Become predictable. Make everyone comfortable. And when it doesn't, people start watching. Who are you dating? Who have you dated more? Who do you look at? Who do you talk about? What was your last relationship? Suddenly, your entire romantic history becomes evidence in a case you never agreed to participate in. Because bisexual people are often allowed to exist until someone wants certainty. Then the interrogation begins. So which do you actually prefer? It sounds like curiosity. Sometimes it is. But sometimes the real question underneath it is darker. Which version of you should I believe? That pressure changes people. Because imagine knowing what you feel while repeatedly being treated like your feelings are temporary evidence. Date someone of another gender and suddenly people decide you're straight. Date someone of the same gender and suddenly people decide you were gay all along. Stay single and someone asks how you can even know. Every possible outcome becomes evidence against you. Your relationship doesn't just become your relationship. It becomes your identity test. And eventually you learn something uncomfortable. People don't always need you to understand yourself. They need you to become understandable to them. There's a difference. Modern culture claims to celebrate complexity. But modern culture is built around categories. Dating apps ask you to filter people. Algorithms learn your preferences. Social media compresses identity into bios, flags, photographs, labels, and 10-second clips. Everything wants to know, what are you? Who do you want? Where do you belong? Because categories make people predictable. And predictability feels safe. Bisexuality can interrupt that psychological shortcut. A bisexual person can be deeply committed to one person without their capacity for attraction magically reorganizing itself around that relationship. But people often confuse commitment with identity. They look at the couple and overwrite the individual. A bisexual woman dates a man. See? Straight. She dates a woman. Maybe she was gay all along. Notice what disappeared in both versions. Her. That creates a strange kind of invisibility. You can be completely visible romantically and psychologically erased at the same time. And repeated erasure creates behavior people rarely notice. You begin explaining yourself before anyone asks. You mention an ex and calculate what someone might assume. You correct your wording. You add context. You monitor reactions. You notice the tiny pause after saying you're bisexual. You notice when curiosity becomes skepticism. You notice when someone's expression changes after hearing about your dating history. Eventually, you're not simply experiencing your identity. You're monitoring how other people are experiencing it. That's when identity becomes performance. Not because you're pretending, because you've learned that being misunderstood has consequences. So you become your own public relations department. Clarify, reassure, translate, explain, again and again, until something deeply personal starts feeling like something you constantly have to defend. Dating makes this even darker, because one of the oldest stereotypes about bisexual people isn't merely that they're confused. It's that they're dangerous to commit to. More genders supposedly means more competition. More attraction supposedly means more opportunities to cheat. More possibilities supposedly means greater risk. So someone's insecurity gets transformed into suspicion about your sexuality. Would you miss being with someone of another gender? Could I ever really be enough? What if you suddenly want something I can't give you? Listen carefully. Those questions aren't necessarily describing bisexuality. They're describing fear of replaceability. But bisexual people can become responsible for managing that fear. They reassure, they explain, they prove, they shrink. Sometimes without realizing it. Maybe you stop mentioning certain attractions. Maybe you avoid discussing an ex. Maybe you laugh at a joke that actually bothered you. Maybe you stop correcting people because you're exhausted. Maybe your partner never explicitly asks you to hide your bisexuality. They just become slightly uncomfortable whenever it becomes visible. So you learn. Quietly, you learn which parts of yourself disturb the peace. And you edit accordingly. That's emotional self-erasure. And the dangerous thing about self-erasure is that it rarely feels dramatic while it's happening. Feels convenient. I don't want another argument. I don't feel like explaining. It doesn't matter. Until eventually, everyone feels comfortable around a version of you that requires your silence. Modern relationships reward emotional convenience more than people admit. Everyone says they want authenticity. Until authenticity becomes complicated. Everyone says communication matters. Until communication requires them to question their assumptions. Everyone wants vulnerability. Until vulnerability introduces uncertainty. And bisexuality can represent uncertainty to people who misunderstand it. Not because bisexual people are inherently uncertain. Because the observer doesn't know which shortcut to use. That's the contradiction. The bisexual person gets labeled confused, while everyone else is demanding they simplify themselves. And the pressure doesn't always come from straight spaces. Sometimes bisexual people enter queer spaces expecting automatic understanding and discover another test waiting for them. Are you queer enough? Have you dated enough people of the same gender? Are you experimenting? Are you going to leave? Are you secretly straight? Are you secretly gay? Different accusation. Same mechanism. Prove yourself. And once your identity becomes something you must prove, there is no winning. Because evidence never ends the interrogation. It just creates another question. That's how external suspicion becomes internal surveillance. Eventually, you may start checking yourself. Was that attraction real? Do I prefer one gender? Does that invalidate something? What does my dating history say about me? What if my attraction changes? What if everyone else understands me better than I understand myself? Now something has shifted. Nobody needs to interrogate you anymore. You've learned to do it yourself. That is what repeated invalidation can create. Self-surveillance. And social media amplifies it. Online identity culture rewards certainty. Clear labels travel faster. Simple narratives generate cleaner reactions. Complexity requires attention. Attention is disappearing. So people increasingly expect identities to function like brands. Consistent, recognizable, predictable. But human beings aren't brands. Attraction doesn't exist for an algorithm. An identity doesn't owe strangers perfect consistency. Complexity is not confusion. Fluidity is not dishonesty. And choosing one person does not require deleting every part of yourself that exists beyond that relationship. But hookup culture creates another problem. Bisexuality can be fetishized instead of understood. Someone may find it exciting, adventurous, forbidden, sexy, a fantasy, which creates another brutal contradiction. You can be desired specifically because you're bisexual, while still not being respected as bisexual. Desired publicly, misunderstood privately. Because fascination isn't acceptance. Attention isn't understanding. And sexualization isn't emotional recognition. That distinction matters, especially when chronic misunderstanding makes recognition feel addictive. Someone finally says, "I get it," and it feels enormous. Someone doesn't question you, doesn't interrogate your history, doesn't turn your attraction into a threat, doesn't demand percentages, doesn't need proof. And suddenly, something incredibly ordinary feels unusually intimate. Being believed. Because validation hits differently when disbelief has become normal. That's why the pressure to pick a side can become much deeper than an annoying stereotype. It can alter how someone moves through relationships. You scan reactions. You anticipate jealousy. You over-explain. You reassure before reassurance was requested. You become emotionally hypervigilant, always calculating, how much of me is safe here? How much explanation will this require? Will they understand? Will they fetishize it? Will they doubt it? Will they eventually ask me to choose? That's exhausting. And eventually, exhaustion creates survival strategies. Some bisexual people become louder about their identity because they're tired of disappearing. Others become quieter because they're tired of defending it. Some joke about it. Some become defensive. Some over-explain. Some stop explaining completely. Different behaviors. Same underlying pressure. Chronic misunderstanding creates emotional translation fatigue. Every new person becomes another decision. Do I explain myself, or let them misunderstand me? And sometimes misunderstanding feels easier. That's the disturbing part. Self-erasure rarely begins with shame. Sometimes it begins with exhaustion. You stop correcting one assumption, then another. You let someone call your relationship straight or gay. You stop mentioning something because explaining feels like work. Eventually, silence becomes easier than accuracy, and everyone around you becomes comfortable, except you, because being accepted as an edited version of yourself is not the same as being understood. You can be socially included and psychologically invisible. You can be desired and still misread. You can be loved and still feel translated incorrectly. And eventually, the deepest exhaustion isn't bisexuality itself. It's managing everybody else's interpretation of it. Their curiosity, their insecurity, their fantasies, their skepticism, their need for certainty. That's a lot of emotional labor for an identity that belongs to you. And this exposes what pick a side was really about. Predictability. People like categories because categories reduce uncertainty. Straight, gay, single, taken, available, unavailable, known, unknown. Bisexuality can expose how fragile those categories are. Because a bisexual person can choose one partner without choosing one category of attraction. They can commit without becoming simpler. They can love someone completely without rewriting themselves to make that love believable. And that's what people keep confusing. Choosing a person is not choosing a side. A bisexual person in a committed relationship has already chosen. They chose their partner. Why should commitment require identity erasure as additional proof? Maybe that's the darkest part of this pressure. We tell people to be authentic, then reward them for being easy to categorize. We celebrate individuality, then become uncomfortable when someone's individuality refuses prediction. We demand honesty, then make honesty exhausting. So people learn to offer simpler versions of themselves. Not because those versions are more truthful, because they're easier for everyone else to understand. And identity erosion rarely happens through one enormous rejection. It happens through tiny negotiations. One joke you don't challenge. One assumption you don't correct. One relationship you let define you. One part of yourself you stop explaining. One uncomfortable conversation you avoid. Again. And again. Until the question changes. It stops being, which side should I choose? And becomes, why did everyone need me to have a side at all? Because maybe bisexual people were never standing between two sides. Maybe everyone else simply needed them to be, so the world would feel easier to categorize.